各位贵宾好。
Ladies and gentlemen, so for this session up until 11:40, this is our fourth session, Possibilities and Limitations of the CRPD. The moderator is Senior Researcher Professor Nagase Omasu of Ritsumeikan University. The floor is yours, Professor Nagase.
では、ただいまより第4セッション、障害者権利条約。
Hello everyone. So for this fourth session, Possibilities and Limitations of the CRPD. This reflects the theme of our forum. So since yesterday and today, we have heard such fruitful presentations throughout the entire day and today, and I'm sure you are probably tired of it. So yesterday we talked about reasonable accommodations, the keynote speech from Professor Karen Fisher, and we talked about other elements of reasonable accommodations in the first session. In the second session, we also talk about deinstitutionalization. And during the second session, I'm the most impressed with our Korean speaker, Jong-ok, saying that rather than implementing the deinstitutionalized movement, we should have the people with disability to live independently. That should be our goal. So people often say that a lot of people with disability are living in institutions and facilities, and persons with disability actually want to live within the community, but it's oftentimes they don't have the autonomy, they don't have the choice, and that is a huge problem. And we want to promote their independent living. And this is really crucial. The third topic is supported decision making. Joining us online, Professor Yu Lian from China talked about ableism, and that has impressed me the most. Since in 2017 and 2022, just as Commissioner Wang Rongjiang mentioned that for Taiwan's national review of the state report of Taiwan CRPD implementation, and I served as the member of the chair of the International Expert Committee. And during those two reviews, I have learned so much. And in the second keynote speech of Professor Zhang has impressed me as well. Professor Zhang mentioned the principles of CRPD. And our next keynote speaker earlier this morning, Commissioner Rosemary Kayes, also once again mentioned ableism, and that has been a key in her speech. And Commissioner Kayes and me have collaborations in terms of CRPD since 2006. And we find that ableism should be put in the articles of the CRPD to prohibit it. And next, we will have the presenters of our session 4. Each presenter has 15 minutes. So our first presenter is Assistant Professor Zheng Yang-yi from National Central University. Hello everyone. I am Zheng Yang-yi. First, let me introduce the background of this theme, because community college is a special characteristic in Taiwan, and it has a different context worldwide. I have participated in the work in community college for over 10 years, And I have known so many friends with disabilities, and I find that in this field, there is no one discussing for persons with disability trying to learn within the system and where they should go. And no one really discuss how this environment is inclusive enough. So for the adult members of adult people, friends with disabilities, if they want to extend their education, where they can go. And that is why I want to venture into this topic, and why did I use evaluation system as an angle. Why? It's because I feel that the government stance and official evaluation are inseparable. That is why I want to enter from this angle. And this is a structural form that I drew. So CRPD emphasizes on inclusive education, but we need to translate that into domestic law. And in domestic law, there are 3 aspects, including reasonable accommodation and accessibility and universal design. And going to the physical spaces, to the specific fields, where we can observe the actual facts, and we learn that there is a huge need in this area. And then going into the actual scene of community college, if we need to have theory as our foundation, and just as our previous speakers, they say that institutions, employers, and caregivers, just as Professor Fisher said, that all these different parties require support.
Afterwards, when they enter into the community college, they will be facing 3 questions. I'll talk about these 3 issues. That is the physical barriers. Secondly, whether or not the administrative team has the capacity to receive. And thirdly, how do the staff or faculties adjust their attitude? Through these evaluations, we find that there are 3 issues that will affect how we allow these adult persons with disabilities to be included. So this is the overall framework. Let's come to the first one. That is CRPD and lifelong learning. The main content of lifelong learning is included in Article 24, education. But if you read Article 24, lifelong learning is only 1 sentence among the whole chapter. So not a lot is mentioned regarding lifelong learning. The majority of the resources are still focusing more on these, the education system, official education system. But how do adult persons with disabilities receive this education? I don't need to go into it. I believe you are familiar enough with CRPD, but I want to say that lifelong learning in the overall study of persons with disability, it's not a complementary education. For instance, for my mom only has elementary school education, and she also went to high school after she is already an adult. So because of the system now, currently you don't have these. We have little systems like this, but I think lifelong learning is a realization of justice, because it is to show, be it a hand angel and others, it is about showing the social connection. A lot of our partners, if they go to community college, they are not there to learn knowledge itself. It is a way for them to make friends, to expand their life, and to go outside, step outside, to actually realize their self-worth. So I think that's the important thing, and it is not a part of just about education. It is also about realizing social justice. Okay, there are domestic legalization, for instance. There are 3 issues of reasonable accommodation. Professor Fisher talked about many aspects that needs to be considered in reasonable accommodation. Now, this is the situation in Taiwan. In terms of education, something similar to reasonable accommodation is ISP. But I think the problem would also be shown in another thing. That is, if we want to hire a assistants or any supporters in Taiwan, if you don't have enough personnel, even if you don't have enough personnel, that doesn't constitute discrimination. So this means that if you fail to satisfy reasonable accommodations, it will still not constitute discrimination, and that's a bit odd here in Taiwan. The second thing is the design of accessibility. Currently shown in our Buildings Act, but the main issue is that for private institutions or private agencies, if they fail to provide accessibilities, it seems that there is no law governing this. And also, even in public agencies, even if they include accessibility, there is still problems of accessibility. For instance, there's accessible buildings. You have accessibility restrooms in the ground floor and in the basement, but it is not accessible to us all because it's still a differential treatment to everyone because it's not on the other floors. Wait a sec. Okay. Last but not least, universal design. Different from other constitutions, universal design is only an advocacy. It's not asked to be realized in any of the areas because it may involve concepts, design, and technology, etc. Moving on. So these important principles through CRPD and the realization of CRPD, the government has the obligations to achieve all those. However, it can be divided into two parts. That is, government agencies at all levels need to cover all this. Honestly, these principles would then still involve the executive branch. So in the second part, for executive powers, they do have a legal binding effect. For instance, if we request the executive branches to provide such services, they are obliged to do so. Next, how it's shown in what's the current situation of lifelong learning in Taiwan. First, it's the number of people in lifelong learning. This is based on the numbers provided by the Ministry of Health and Welfare. So people above 18 years old, there is a significant reduction of number in school. So normally, so this is between 12 to 18. Normally, after high school, the percentage of persons with disabilities in education system is actually quite low. This means that many of the persons with disabilities has the opportunity of inclusive educations, but going up and with higher and higher educations, the fewer and fewer persons with disabilities have the opportunity of inclusive education. The black one is actually the persons with disabilities with needs to attend school, only 6%. 93%, close to 94% of adult persons with disabilities, even before they're adults, they no longer have education area. So that means that the demand is quite high, and that's why this topic is very important. And yet in the past, we don't treat it in a balanced manner. The majority of the resources are put within the formal education system. That's all right, I'll move on. So why is it we have these two differences? Because within the formal education system, you will have all these different indirect support system in. For instance, there's counseling, there is career guidance, there is continuous higher guidance for higher education. But once they're grown, it seems that they're individualized. You no longer need to support through this system. So that's the biggest difference. Within the formal education system, we still think that they still need some uneducational resources in. But once you get out of the formal education system, it seems that you no longer need so. Next, with the care ethics. The concept is quite complex because currently you need to have a venue to look at it, otherwise we will not be able to do research. Now, community college is in the last area, but it is the only or one of the few areas where we can observe. In other areas, in other venues, libraries, museums, we can't really say it's a venue for inclusive education, even though it's stipulated so, but it's hard for observation to happen. Because of time constraint, I will not be able to go deep into it, but the most important thing is that currently resources are allocated for individual personnel. Everyone as an individual, but I will have to say that we are dependent. Human beings are dependent, relying on each other. But within this influence, caregiver has this non-given obligation, because if we have 15% of the population as persons with disabilities, then these caregivers will need to borne these responsibilities. So we can't really see them as individuals. Same goes to resource allocation. If community colleges is such an important venue, it needs to get more support. How do we get more support? It needs to come from the evaluation system. So let's look at the evaluation system. The importance of college is that it is about liberalizing the knowledge system. If you think of community college, you will think of the U.S. community college, but it's not. Or you will think of it as a cram school. You learning additional skills like learning computer skills and others. But no, it's not, because there's also this importance of class management. Because even if you are there to learn different scores, but people are highly connected within the community college. A lot of people will study in the community college till they're old. People will stay in this community college 10 or 20 years, doesn't want to graduate because they feel that this is very interesting. They will enter different programs. This is to them sort of like a family. Next, moving on to the number of people. Currently in Taiwan, we have 90 community colleges and 400,000 people studying in this. Now, if for them to get fee deductions, we have like 3,000 to 4,000. Without the certification that is quasi persons with disabilities, we have more. So this is a very important venue for persons with disabilities. Of course, gender is involved. You can see that the number of female are normally twice as the male, but I would not be able to cover that. That's a different issue. Why is it evaluation is very important? Because the evaluations with around 20% of the subsidy comes from the evaluation incentive payment. So this would affect whether or not people would provide more facilities for persons with disabilities in community college. And also through the evaluations, you would also determine whether or not the community college can continue to receive its funding, because every 2 to 3 years they will need to receive a community evaluation and determine whether or not the college can continue. Simply put, there are 3 aspects in the evaluation of community college. First is that the evaluation is conducted by local governments, and persons with disabilities have never been a top issue. You have all these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but only in direction 3 you have a small part for the diverse groups. So it is not the key for evaluation. Whether or not you provide services to persons with disabilities does not will not affect whether or not you can continue the service or not. Also, the reason for the Education Bureau to do this is quite limited, because lifelong learning actually involves social culture and sports and also the labor bureau. So it should be divided by and many different bureaus should also get involved in evaluation. These are all the departments like as I listed here. They are not in the evaluation, so only the education results is seen. But this doesn't conform with the needs of persons with disabilities in inclusive education. So what I'm thinking is that what would be the ideal way? The ideal way is that if we want to domesticate all these 3 different principles into the government level, through this government, this means that be from a local or central government, when they are conducting evaluations, they should not only rely on Department of Education and view this lifelong learning value. It's not enough. They should also, in practice, coordinate with different departments. It doesn't need to have a working task force, but I think at least you need to coordinate with other departments, and those other departments involved should also play a role in this evaluation so that it can reflect on the needs of lifelong learning, and so that we can fully evaluate the effect of lifelong learning. The reason it is very important is because we are also entering into ultra-aging society. If you look at this situation, you can see that there are also middle-aged and even senior-aged citizens, and that's why all these departments should be involved in evaluation. How is it affecting us? Because we need to change the executive branches. I will now share with you the results, even though I have an example from Japan. But in Japan, they have these lifelong learning support programs asking the persons with disabilities and other government agencies to provide the proposals and to encourage lifelong learning for persons with disabilities. In conclusion, Lifelong learning is very important, but we fail to value it, and it's only seen as an education. But it actually involves many different aspects. Also, if we need to realize CRPD, then we need to think outside of the box. We need to think of it not only as an education, but as the overall development of human beings. Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much for the presentation. So regarding the education for persons with disabilities in lifelong learning, I think this is being elaborated very clearly. And this is something that we normally wouldn't notice when we are researching topics related to persons with disabilities. Thank you very much for the sharing. Also includes that affected by CRPD in education, we should also focus more and to look at it from the educational perspective and reform and amend the laws accordingly. That's why I do believe that it's a very good perspective. Thank you very much for your sharing. Next, we would like to invite Professor Satoshi Kawashima from the Open University of Japan. Professor Kawashima is a director of the Society for Persons with Disability, for Disability Studies.
皆さん、こっちか。
Hello, everyone. Good morning. I am Satoshi Kawashima. Today, I'm gonna talk about the models of disability and present an analysis of the CRPD. Currently, in the university, I serve as an assistant to the president to help students with disabilities. So I will share my experience in practice as well. And my priority would be accessibility facilities today. First of all, CRPD. Before we talk about CRPD, we need to look at the introduction of CRPD. And we need to think about this issue, that what kind of models are in place. What does the preamble of the CRPD adopt? So that is a concept of development or constant development. So there is English description on the slides. So CRPD's preamble both focuses on society and disabilities. So there is a adoption of two models at the same time. And what are the relationships between the two models? So for the unrelated formula, for people without, so in the relationship between the social model and disability makes it that the interaction between persons with impairments and attitudinal environmental barriers hinder their full and effective participation in society on an equal basis with others. So international, in the words listed in the preamble of CRPD. So we can say that it's an ICF model. So those with impairment they often encounter barriers in terms of ICF. In comparison, some may say that CRPD adopts a social model and for those with impairments or disabilities, they feel that they are excluded from the society, and that stems from the social model, especially because that there are so many obstacles for people with disability to fully participate in society. Currently, many may feel that it's either ICF or social model that hinders social participation for people with disability. And which model is more suitable for the interpretation of CRPD? People are still debating over this, but for me personally, I am more inclined to social model. Secondly, when it comes to the social model, is there only one social model of disability or there are multiple ones? So when it comes to social models, so it may be singular or plural. So for plural, people may argue that you can interpret social models in different layers. So I'm more inclined to the plural of social model as well. From the English description here, the plural form of social model can be interpreted in multiple ways. For example, in the UK, a scholar, Michael Lipa, defined a social model as this scholar defines that disability doesn't have any relationship with the disabilities of the obstacles that they face in the society. So the obstacles do not come from disability. The obstacles come from the society. The barriers. So the barriers that we say here may be interrelated. They may affect one another. And some other scholars may interpret the social model using the related formula. But the key difference here would be people's interpretation. Because either way, people are all discussing the barriers that people with disability actually face in the society. So whichever you interpret, there is still a lot of barriers in the society, and that is a format of interpretation. And legally speaking, we would call mother as a term for a biological relationship. So that is a way of formal interpretation. So barriers related to the society or unrelated to the society. So there are two types of barriers. And for CRPD, it emphasizes the relationship between people with disability and their connection with society. Formally speaking, that is the case, but we can say that when persons with disabilities living in the society, they face all different types of barriers. And to adopt this social model interpretation compared to ICF is more suitable. Now let's look at the third question. CRPD in Article 1, what kind of model does Article 1 of CRPD adopt? Allow me to cite it. The purpose of the present convention is to promote, protect, and ensure the full and equal enjoyment of all human rights and fundamental freedoms by all persons with disabilities, and to promote respect for their inherent dignity. We can say that it is a human rights model of disability. We are all very familiar with that. So the question here is that the persons with disabilities, how they view the inconvenience and lack of freedom they face. We need to correct or adjust the situation using CRPD and protect their fundamental rights equal to any other people. That is the human rights model. So that's based on human rights. We need to eliminate the barriers that people with disability face using the human rights approach. But we can still interpret it in different ways. Is there only one human rights model of disability? We can see from the slide as well, there are traditional interpretation and other interpretations. The traditional interpretation is to guarantee the Freedom Committee of the UN. So traditional interpretation of human rights model of disability is to permit the last resort, just as in Japan there is forced hospitalization or forced or coercive treatment. But that's in contrast with CRPD's committee's interpretation, because no matter what the circumstances are, we should prohibit the last resort or coercive treatment or forced hospitalization. Even so, some may say that when it's necessary, we should have the authority or ability to have mandatorily put people with disability into hospitals, but some may argue against it. So on this basis, we need to think about how we can improve, and that would be discussing the difference between the social model and human rights model. And the first scholar, Degener, said that we need to improve the models, to improve the human rights model into a society model, social model. And the second would be Lawson and Beckett. They are stating that the social model and the human rights model are complementary. And me personally, I would propose that it should be more than complementary. I feel that there is actually a tension between the social model and the human rights model. It's not just about how one can complement another, but we also need to look at how they contradict one another. So lastly, I want to propose a question to all of you. What are the significance and limitations of the CRPD in terms of models of disability? From the perspectives of a person with disabilities, we can say that CRPD can enhance human rights protection for persons with disabilities. However, we need to notice that the human rights model in the past, up until now, you can say that CRPD negates the concepts proposed by the previous human rights models, because in the previous human rights models, there is still segregation, there is still isolation, exclusion in education and other environments, and even mandatory hospitalization or deprivation of their legal rights. However, in comparison, the human rights model proposed by CRPD do not permit any of these last resort measures. And that is the significance of CRPD. So the human rights models of the past actually pose barriers for people with disability in the society. And the human rights model proposed by the UN prohibits any opportunities for people with disability to expand their lives. So we need to recommend the UN to shift away from the previous human rights models to really identify the suitable ways. And that is something that the CRPD committee at the UN is actually conducting. So what about the limitations of CRPD? There are extrinsic limitations and intrinsic limitations. The extrinsic ones can be overcome. As I mentioned, human rights models of the past brings barriers to the lives or activities of people with disability. And all these barriers can be eliminated or eradicated. But it's very difficult to eradicate intrinsic limitations of CRPD. For example, CRPD requires signatories, requires state duty without any penalty. So even though CRPD has this regulation on the state parties, but there is no power to penalize those who do not comply with such duty. And also, reasonable accommodation is not mandatory in CRPD. So the requirements toward the society can only be in place gradually. Changing the society requires more effort than just penalty or written regulations. So these are the intrinsic limitations to CRPD. So what else can we do to address these limitations? I cannot tell you a specific answers, but I just want to invite you to think with me for a proper solution. Thank you.
川島先生、大変刺激的なご報告。
Thank you to Mr. Kawashima for your brilliant speech. In your presentation, you talk about how to apply or to have this complementary aspect between the two models. Lawson and Beckett visited Japan and discussed this issue with Professor Kawashima, and they had a heated debate over whether the two models are complementary or having tensions. So I look forward that these scholars, these experts can continue to discuss in the East Asian forums like this. I think the overlap or contradiction between the social model and human rights model, that's something I am also interested in. I may conduct research on this. And next, we will invite our third speaker from Korea, Jo Han-jin from Daegu University.
We know that the university has actually a department on disability, so I would like to ask Han-jin Cho to give us a presentation, who is actually the president of the Korean Society for Disability Studies. Well, he also contributed so much, allowing the East Asia Disability Studies Forum to continue to this day. Hello, everyone. I am the Jo Han-jin from the Department of Disability Studies at Graduate School of Daegu University. Our department is in South Korea and was established in 2018. In 2018, we were the only graduate school that provides graduate school programs that studies disabilities. Afterwards, we've also provided doctoral programs. So we're the only school that provides doctoral programs. We gathered also college students from all over Korea. We're not in Seoul, but still many students would come, even fly to attend the school. Within our students, we have students that are older than I am and also persons with disabilities. So a lot of students and students of diversities come and joined our department. If you talk about the disability studies, you would definitely hear our school. The topic that I'm assigned is the possibilities and limitations of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. I want to talk about some possibilities issue. At the same time, I will also talk about some limitations. Actually, I'm not sure what best to cover, but since I'm assigned with this topic, I did some preparation. So I'm going to share with you what I prepared. CRPD, it's a protection to the equal dignity, autonomy, and worth of persons with disabilities. So it has this expressive value. Secondly, it is a trigger for national actions. The CRPD is designed to trigger among state parties at the national level to engage with person disability laws and policies. Thirdly, the convention is a trigger for social integration. And indeed, it does offer an opportunity through its inclusive vision and mission. It facilitates and promotes persons with disabilities to be integrated into the society. So what impact does the convention has on Korea? In Asia and Pacific regions, many state parties, after they ratify the convention, they would also introduce some laws related to the rights of persons with disabilities. In Korea, it was published in 2007, an act on prohibition of discrimination against persons with disabilities. And in 2016, there's enactment of Korea Sign Language Act. The Sign Language Act regulates that be it local or central governments, they are obliged to provide these accessible services for persons with disabilities. It is a clear regulations with the domestic law status. So that's the only law that's related to these aspects. The third law is in 2019, we amended the Act on Welfare of Persons of Disabilities, abolishing the grading system regarding disability. So after the Disability Committee amended the law, it abolished this system. But of course, even though the system was abolished, but in reality, people may still have some ideas regarding the grading of disability. Next is an example from China. The concept is included in CRPD, and so in 2008, the protection of persons with disabilities was revised, amended. Even though with this amended new law, and even though many many states ratified CRPD, they do not have effective national disability laws and policies to implement. So that's why currently we see a great insufficiency for the laws and regulations. As for the limitations of the convention, I also want to give you a more concrete example. Even though we've shared with you a lot of things related to laws, but there are still a lot of limitations. For instance, we mentioned yesterday such as supported decision-making, etc. I feel that this is not just a provision within the convention. It is also about how we see the convention, and I don't think we have that awareness enough. At the same time, many countries only protect persons with disabilities after they're born, and we fail to protect pre-born persons with disabilities. That's why we still discriminated against fetal persons with disabilities. Secondly, the convention doesn't offer a protection for the religious freedoms for persons with disabilities. Currently, the persons with disabilities has the right to insist that a residential or a medical facilities which they live offer ample opportunities to participate in religious activities. When I was writing my thesis, a PhD candidate is actually a Catholic. A Catholic institution required all persons with disabilities to participate the Sunday Mass. But some people may not be a believer, but they are forced to attend the Mass. When I heard things like this, I found that religious belief is also a very important aspect. Sometimes persons with disabilities may have different beliefs than their guardians or their family members. They should have the right to choose their own rituals and customs. In addition to medical and other caring rights, they should also have the rights to mental services, and these are unclear in the convention. Next is regarding the challenges in implementing the convention. So far, we should see persons with disabilities as having equal rights and as the full objects of that, deserving the full and equal respect, and not as an object to be managed or pitied on. But we don't have that implemented and realized. For instance, in Seoul, they have listed some regulations. Some is targeted towards caregivers, some towards persons with disabilities. Even though with these regulations, but in terms of implementation, it's not that easy. Because many people are still conservative, they still have a very conservative mindset. And a while ago, that regulations was actually discarded. The Persons with Disabilities Committee in Korea wanted to have these paradigm shift, but was failed. That means that if we want to have a good shift, then without a proper management, there will be inconsistency between policy and implementation. This also applies to Korea, even though the situations of persons with disabilities was considered. For instance, there's also the the laws that prohibit the discrimination against the persons with disabilities. But the problem is that, for instance, our Ministry of Welfare do not have enough understanding of CRPD and the Anti-Discrimination Act. They still have a lot of insufficiencies. Thirdly, we lacked a robust monitoring frameworks to evaluate the implementation of the convention. That's why signatories should have a good look and review the implementation of CRPD and the laws and regulations that have been enacted before signing the convention, which should review those conventions and see if there's any incompliance with the convention and ensure they are compliant with the convention. At the national level, they should also have a designated committee and expert group to review whether these policies and laws are in line with the convention. It should also actually establish amendment laws based on the percentage and ratio of the persons with disabilities. For instance, take Korea, for example. There have been inconsistency between different levels of laws and regulations. So we should still follow the spirit of the convention to add or amend relevant provisions. Some provisions and regulations have not been sufficient and effective, so we still need to promote its amendments. And the amendments in laws and policies should come from our understanding to the social model of disabilities and reflect them in the policy of the laws. In order to make such corrections, state parties should ensure an effective administrative infrastructure to implement disability legislation and policies.
국가 차원, 정부 차원에서뿐 아니라
This is not only should be conducted on the state level. We also need to establish effective indicators and monitoring and evaluation frameworks, which the CSOs should be involved as well. I'm sure all of you here, will play a very important role in this. We need to work together to monitor and supervise the implementation of CRPD for it to utilize its full potential. It's not just from the scholars, the committees, the people with disabilities, and all of our attendees of the forum. We should all continue to monitor. This wraps up my presentation. Thank you. Thank you to Mr. Johanji giving us an experience in a very practical way. When we talk about limitations and possibilities and freedom of religion, all these has intrigued me so much. Indeed, for religious beliefs, research in this area is still lacking. And perhaps in caring for equal opportunity, religious belief or freedom to religion plays a very important role. And the family members should also have equal opportunity. So this is really important. So thank you very much for mentioning that. So the convention doesn't really stipulate anything about religious freedom, so that may be a future subject of research. Thank you. Next, our fourth speaker is Professor Zhao Kun from Southwest University of Political Science and Law from China. She will give us this presentation in video, so let's play the video. Hello, everyone. The audio is not clear for the interpreter to interpret. The audio is glitchy, so the interpreter cannot interpret. The video audio is glitchy, so the interpreter cannot interpret. The audio is not the audio is glitchy, the interpreter cannot interpret.
新给大家少三种方式，这种方式就是按对。
The first method is case promotion, which is to seize influential cases or even consciously shape influential cases so that the rights, demands of people with disabilities can quickly enter the cause of social justice and legislation. This is a relatively prominent way for people with disabilities in China to participate in legislation. Here are two cases. One happened 10 years ago. A candidate Li Jingsheng in Henan, at the age of 46, took the college entrance examination. As a visually impaired person, his age is symbolic significance of taking the college entrance exam, and the significance is far greater than the actual significance of his receiving higher education. At the time he participated in the college entrance exam, especially when he registered for 2 consecutive years, in fact, the main purpose was to make it clear to the public that visually impaired people also have the right to receive equal higher education. This case attracted widespread attention at the time and was actually directly related to the involvement of disability organizations and the media. So sometimes we need to consciously shape influential cases. In 2017, the regulation on the education of persons with disabilities were revised, and Article 52 clarified that necessary conditions and reasonable accommodations needed to be provided for persons with disabilities to participate in national education exams. This is the first time that the word reasonable accommodation appears in Chinese law. Another case happened at the beginning of the pandemic. So in the early days of COVID outbreak in 2020, there was a child named Yan Chen who was a cerebral palsy patient. His parents were quarantined due to the pandemic, and Yan Chen had no one to take care of him at home, and he eventually died. And the incident was exposed by the media and quickly attracted widespread attention. Around this incident, disability organizations actively spoke out. In May that year, China passed the Civil Code, and in Article 34 of the Civil Code clearly stated that when a sudden incident or emergency situation causes a disabled person to, when a guardian is left without care, the residents committee or village committee and civil affairs department of the ward's residents shall arrange necessary temporary living care measures for the wards. This clause is called the Yanchen Clause by groups of parents with mental disabilities. Therefore, these two cases illustrate that it's a practical method to actively promote legislation or legislative amendment on a case-by-case basis. The second method is expert opinion. And I will introduce my lover, Zhang Wanhong, as a member of the community and as a law professor who has been engaged in disability research for a long time. He actively participated in the revision of local and national laws and generation of new laws as a legal expert. For example, when the legal aid law was drafted, Wang Hong once suggested adding accessibility clauses. And when Hubei, where Wang Hong was located, was drafting the Hubei province barrier-free accessibility environment construction management rules, he also suggested reasonable accommodations to be included in the measures. Such suggestions put forward by experts proved to be when actual laws were enacted can be partially or completely adopted. So it's another effective way to practice. And the third type would and the 2 committees. So the government People's Assembly. So the people with disabilities can persuade the people's representatives and members of the political council to submit proposals and push and promote for legislation. And some of these representatives and commissioners themselves, they are people with disabilities. So they would use their identity or as their role to advocate for the needs and rights of people with disability and propose in the General Assembly. For example, Yang Jia, who is visually impaired. So she's personally really involved in providing reasonable accommodation for the visually impaired and also guaranteeing the rights of women with disability were submitted to the General Assembly and receive enough attention and effect because of her personal opinion. So to conclude all these experience, I'd like to propose some of my insights. First, we need to focus on the timing of for law amendments, because for national laws to be drafted or amended can only happen during every spring during the National People's Representations Assembly. And for the persons with disability to transform their needs into written law, we need to capture the timing like this. For example, between 2021 to 2025, that is the second phase of National Sign Language Action Plan. So the National Action Plan on Sign Language and Braille Reform. So for people with hearing impairment, need to capture these 5 years and to facilitate the amendment of general languages and used by the country, and to establish sign language as a legal language in its legal status, and that is a great timing. The second experience is that we need to make use of CRPD and the concluding observations. As we all know that there is a social model and reasonable accommodation. All these are power dynamics and language adopted by CRPD. If we can use that as a guide for promoting people with disabilities' rights, and that is a great tool to make legal amendments. So we need to make use of such tools. In recent years, the Chinese government really focused on the insights or the comments by the CRPD committee and the concluding observation. So for our people with disabilities and our DPOs also need to incorporate concluding observations in their advocacy, and we can be more effective. The third experience is to identify allies and to find allies. We need to avoid working alone. We need to work jointly as much as possible to work with social organizations, experts and scholars, media, lawyers, to work together to achieve our goals. The fourth is that we need to go through multiple channels and methods. Methods and approaches are being more and more diverse, and we must make good use of them. Beside expert opinions, proposals, we can also make use of the complaints mechanisms or suggestion boxes by governments at all levels, or to file lawsuits and performance arts to express our demands. The fifth experience is that the people with disabilities and DPOs, when they're able, should conduct research on the rights issues that they're concerned about, especially empirical research. It's necessary to formulate research reports and publish those reports so that they can provide valuable reference materials for legislators, and the statistics and evidence can be very persuasive or convincing basis for legislators to amend laws. The last lesson, in my opinion, is that from the occurrence to the revision of the law, it takes a long time, and it can never be achieved overnight. So we need to have the determination, patience, and perseverance. As for people with disabilities, we must constantly find ways to link their needs or demands with the revision and passage of laws, little by little. And that is how we can improve the situation of people with disabilities through the rule of law. And we really need to be patient and commit to it. And we must spare no efforts and be patient. So this is what I want to share with you. Feel free to correct me if there is any incorrections, and thank you very much. After hearing Professor Zhao's presentation, I really look forward to meet with Professor Zhao in person.
Especially, we had an opportunity to remember Professor Zhang yesterday. So if it's possible, I really hope that she was also here to join us in remembering the professor, especially regarding the third part of the presentation. I think I'm the most impressed about that. Anyways, we have 4 presenters giving us the presentations. Next, we will go to the discussion. We would like to invite we also have also an authority in this area. We'd like to invite Professor Sun Nanyi from College of Law at National Taiwan University.
好，非常荣幸。
I'm very honored to have this opportunity to look at these practices from these 4 countries and and join you here. I am Sun Nanyi from National Taiwan University. I teach in the College of Law. From the presentations, I think we would be able to see that through regular review and periodic review of the state reports and also through legislations. After ratifying CRPD, I think each countries have ratified the CRPD for almost 10 years, and we do see some progress. At least we do see the momentum brought by CRPD. Within this momentum, we can see it being shown in several aspects. First of all, it allows us to have new enactment, new legislation, or amendment of existing laws and regulations. So at least these amendments are now possible. In the past, the legislations may come from the medical perspective or medical model, but with the requirements of the CRPD, state parties now need to look at it from the social model or from the rights model and review those domestic laws. And this also facilitates amendments of different laws and regulations. Key areas of the amendments involves reasonable accommodation, accessibility. Some countries even have already enacted the Anti-Discrimination Act. Secondly, with CRPD, administrative or executive branches now have more resources to facilitate and to get closer to the different aspects of persons with disabilities and realize the possibility of equality. So now more resources can be devoted into the accessibility of resources. Secondly, because of CRPD in different countries, we now see that persons of disabilities will leverage litigations to call and claim for their rights. And this, just as the Chinese scholar said, some may be intentional. They want to use strategic litigation. Through litigation, they want to facilitate the amendment of laws and policies. Secondly, we will also see that because of the introduction of CRPD in different countries, we also see many social organizations, persons with disabilities organizations being very active in leveraging different channels to participate in the system, participate in the development of policies. That is also mentioned in the premise of the CRPD, nothing about us without us, and all things involved in with the persons with disabilities needs the participation of persons with disabilities. Now, I would like to share with you some experience in Taiwan. For the past 10 years, we leverage amendments or laws. In terms of amendments and laws, we do now see some new laws and regulations and amendments of existing laws. For instance, the detention law and the Prison Act. Well, we never thought that in this relatively unfamiliar law that you wouldn't relate this with the persons with disabilities, but these two acts, when they're amending, they include reasonable accommodations in the provisions of those laws. Recently, I just want to share with you some examples. In the past 2 to 3 years, we have the Mental Health Act amendments. We also have Special Education Act amendments, and the National Language Act also recognizes sign language as one of the national languages. In Taiwan, we have multiple national languages, whereas sign language is one of them. And also, in my research areas, I've also seen many procedural acts related to the court. Many of the amendments have been done through CRPD, but those would be more detailed. At the same time, the government agency is also thinking about the protection of persons with the rights of persons with disabilities. It hasn't been amended for over 10 years, so maybe with CRPD we need to look at it holistically and have an overall amendment. And because of the international review of CRPD, the Taiwanese government was asked to formulate an Anti-Discrimination Act. Now, what should be included within the Anti-Discrimination Act? That's something also been discussed widely. In terms of the executive measures, what's interesting is that the executive departments in Taiwan, because of the state report, because they would invite experts to Taiwan and for at least 3-4 days for their report, the concluding observations in Taiwan after we received is that the government would look at each of the paragraphs in the concluding observations, and different government agencies would allocate this different work and divide this different work. In the next 4 years, they need to propose policies and strategies to respond to those recommendations. Because of this pressure, the government agencies in Taiwan need to take actions. Interestingly, regarding reasonable accommodation, this is not specifically recognized in the laws and regulations, saying that failing to provide reasonable accommodation constitutes as discrimination. Instead, the government provided some softer measures, such as providing guidelines. At the Ministry of Labor and the Ministry of Health and Welfare, they've all had guidelines regarding reasonable accommodation. Also, for legal aid, they have a special project specifically for persons with disabilities. Through the Legal Aid Foundation, they will provide legal aid in proceedings. Last year, I also went to Korea along with the judges at the Judges Academies. We visited the access to justice for persons with disabilities in Korea. Last year, during our visit, I'm very impressed because they have a group of judges who voluntarily formed a study group, a learning group, in which they will look at the access to justice and study these different articles regarding access to justice and make proposals on how to ensure the access to justice. So the access to justice for persons with disabilities guidelines are also referred to at the Ministry of Justice level. And the Ministry of Justice also want to formulate relevant guidelines to judges and persons with disabilities. So this is something that we see at the government agency level. These are some momentums brought by CRPD. Among which, something that's worth mentioning is that regarding the mandatory admission, mandatory hospitalization for persons with severe mental disabilities. Now, this normally in Taiwan, whether or not they should be mandatorily admitted, at the Ministry of Health and Welfare level, they have a review committee where many experts from different aspects will be involved, such as social workers, medical professionals, and legal professionals. They will decide whether a specific or individual patients need to be admitted. Once they are hospitalized, currently within the hospital, their cell phones and all the other electronic devices would be confiscated. They will not be able to use those devices. Therefore, when they are in the hospital, they are isolated from the society. They can contact their family, but they need to use the normal phone, not cell phone. So, landline. So if they want to leverage access to justice, that access would also be restricted. And last year in Taiwan, we've amended the Mental Health Act. Currently, it's not in effect. It hasn't come into force yet, but we expect it to come into force in 2025. The new amended law still hasn't conformed and is not in line with CRPD because it still has compulsory mandatory hospitalization. But in the future, for mandatory hospitalizations, it needs to be decided by the judge. By a court. In the court, they will have three judges. One professional judge and two participating judges. These two participating judges, one of them is a doctor or a medical professional. The other is representatives from DPOs. So, in terms of proceedings, from the very beginning of the proceedings where they are restrained and being settled or mandatorily placed, we will provide them legal aid. Legal Aid Foundation is also discussing about how to provide them in the first instance and provide them assistance. And also during the process, the judges, if necessary, would also assign them proceeding supervisor where they can speak for themselves, sort of like a guardian ad litem. But all these are still under preparation. The legislators still admit that even though there are improvements, it's still not fully in line with CRPD. What we can see is that currently, even though there's improvement, but still, legally speaking, we haven't recognized that denial of reasonable accommodation constitutes as a form of discrimination. As for our accessibility requirements, in the many aspects of the persons with disabilities, they are still lacking. So sometimes in some places you may have accessibilities, but stepping outside of a building, you will find that there's no accessibility. So that accessibility is fragmented. Take Taiwan, for example. Just give you an example. I think that sort of shows and demonstrates the current status of Taiwan and showing what limitations and progress CRPD brings us. Take the example of affirmative actions. Taiwan likes to use affirmative actions as a way to protect the rights of persons with disabilities, and this can be seen in many laws and regulations in Taiwan. They allow and provide these affirmative actions opportunities, but they haven't thought that once they get this opportunity, how do they then be in line or bridged with these environment. For instance, for civil servants, we provide them special examinations designated for persons with disabilities. So with an easier test, they can become civil servants. But we have multiple cases where some persons with disabilities, once they passed the exams and become civil servants, they may not be able to get used or get accustomed to the environment that they work with. For instance, this person is a person with severe depression, and this person works at the elementary school. And for elementary school, it's normally from 8 o'clock to 4 p.m. But because of the medication that person takes, he was not able to go to school at 8 o'clock. He would normally have to go to the workplace at around 11. So if that person is not able to go to work on time, so the principal of the civil servants dismiss the person through the evaluation or through the performance evaluation.
So for this public servant, she filed a lawsuit with the aid of Legal Aid Foundation. So from this case, we see that this case was trialed in the High Administrative Court in Taipei. The judge determined that the civil servant won the case, but the case needs to go back to the elementary school situation, going within the school. So the judge decided that the elementary school should discuss reasonable accommodation with this individual. But however, going back to the school, in the negotiation between the school and the individual, there is no conclusion or agreement, and a lot of factors are at play. For example, the school would say that, oh, the schedule in an elementary school is always between 8 to 4. And you say that we may ask that perhaps this individual can be transferred to other departments with not as an early as a schedule, but it may fall under lots of legal limitations. So from this case, we can see that CRPD implementation in Taiwan, indeed, there is affirmative action for a judge to cite CRPD and to protect the rights granted by the CRPD. However, in practice, there are other regulations or limitations, and because of lack of administrative resources, that the rights cannot be properly protected. So this wraps up my representation. Thank you. Professor Sun is such an expert in CRPD and relative legal issues. We now have 10 minutes for Q&A, open to the floor. If you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand. And if I don't see you raising your hand, please let me see your hand. And I am a patient's family member. I want to ask about CRPD's progress and limitation. Indeed, there is a lot of progress and achievement, but the implementation at this moment still does not fully reflect the needs or demands of the patients or people with disability. So my question here is that for educating people and changing people's mindsets, is there still something that we can improve? I learned from Japan's education reform, there is a term called exception or exclusion. So there are a lot of social issues like bullying or other incidents can be addressed in a mindset shift. So the question is that when implementing CRPD and relevant policies and service design, is it possible for us to educate policymakers or judges or legislators and volunteers so that the implementation of CRPD can be better improved with more friendly general design? So I look forward to all of our experts' feedback. Thank you.
後ろの方で、手を挙げていらっしゃる方のご質問も受けて、それからまとめて、皆さんからお答えをいただきます。
Okay, we have another question from a participant in the back. We will gather a round of questions before we have the experts answer. I am You Zhenrong from Taiwan Autism Foundation. I have worked in the field for 20 years. Our topic in this session is the limitations and possibilities of CRPD. And hearing from the presentation by Professor Kawashima, saying that looking at the service model, looking at CRPD using the social model or the human rights model and the current limitations of the ICF model. Indeed, in Taiwan's implementation of ICF, WHO started in 2001. So WHO started promoting ICF in 2001, and in Taiwan, the implementation started in 2012. And let us look at the implementation of ICF in Taiwan. And Professor Kawashima reminded us that ICF model's current limitations. I think in Taiwan, here's a response to Professor Kawashima. In terms of need assessment, demand assessment, that falls under like 80%. 80% of the resources goes to needs analysis and assessment. Only 20% or less of resources is used to actually deliver the services required for the people with disabilities, so those who are in need. So my question is for Professor Kawashima. You mentioned specifically that whether it's social model or human rights model, there are many barriers still existing. And you also advocate for the UN committee to think about or come up with a new human rights model. And the question is that in the promotion of ICF and CRPD's implementation in Japan, what are the largest barriers that you see? What are the most difficult challenges that you face? Could you share your experience in Japan with us? And for the general public within the society, how can we understand or know more about CRPD and the human rights, its significance to people with disabilities? So these are my questions. Thank you.
貴重なご質問を2ついただきました。
Thank you to our two participants for asking all these important questions. And because of time constraint, we will have our experts answer first. Oh, I still have one last question. I am Ye Dahua from National Human Rights Commission. My question is for Professor Zheng Yangyi. You talk about community college, how it plays a really important role in CRPD. I think it's a great point of view because it's never discussed in the past. And I have encountered a lot of friends from community college. And my question for you is that in your research, how does a community college be aware of this issue and what's their view? Because from your presentation, I don't see their positions. And the evaluation system indeed is a form of intervention. It's a measure of intervention. But community college as a important part of the accommodation mechanism, and how does they see themselves, and why would you conduct such a research because of that? Thank you. Okay, so we have 3 participants, 3 questions from our experts. So let's invite our experts to answer. First, addressing how the judges make decisions. Do we have any one expert that's going to answer first?
好，虽然我是语坛人，好，我可能只能
I can only answer the first question in terms of education. I have a legal background in social studies. The law department doesn't have enough recognition and understanding of people with disability, especially in comparison with the Department of Social Workers or other disciplines. Indeed, there is still more that we need to learn about, and we are only starting to learn. More and more scholars trying to conduct research on this and open courses on this. Another possibility is that from the university end, especially from my department of law, we do have this responsibility to the society, especially public universities. We really need to have people with disability being able to enter the legal field, to legal expertise and study at the Department of Law. And because if the career path for law school is that you may attend bar exams and become attorneys or become prosecutors. And we do have attorneys with disabilities at the moment, but they encounter a lot of barriers. And for the career path towards a judge, there are still a lot of physical limitations, such as for people with hearing impairment, vision impairment, so they cannot pass national exams to become judges or prosecutors. So the able-bodied persons becoming judges at the Judges Academy, in their training, because of CRPD, these judges would take classes on CRPD issues. And to my understanding, people with disability go to these courses and lessons to give share their experience. So that's my understanding of the education part.
大変ありがとうございました。では、2番目の
Thank you very much. Next, the question addressing ICF and the difference between ICF model and social model. Let's invite Professor Kawashima. Thank you for your question. Due to time constraints, I will respond very briefly. If you are still interested, we can connect afterwards. So let's look at my conclusion. When we talk about models, they would have different definitions because of their different purposes. For ICF, it has its interrelationships. And for CRPD, the priority is on human rights. So they have different priorities. That is why we call the CRPD model as the human rights model. But the problem lies with the social model. The social model can be seen as an instrument for discovery. The social model can identify the barriers or problems faced by people with disabilities. So, a model is not a theory, it is an instrument. All of our experts mentioned that within our society, we have this medical system, healthcare system. We would have a fixed mindset on people with disability. There is a fixed stereotype, and with such a model in place, we would be impacted or influenced even more. And at this moment, there is still no way for us to think outside the box. So the existence of the social model allows us to look at the problems or understand people with disabilities from different perspectives. And sometimes I feel that the old human rights model is a barrier as well, because it does not completely or truly protect the rights of people with disability, especially in 1995's Declaration on the Rights of People with Disability. There are so many areas missing from the declaration, including people with intellectual disability or other forms of disability. So the UN emphasizes human rights without covering the actual specific aspects or be comprehensive enough for all aspects.
Even though it's declaring the human rights, but it actually affects the rights of the human rights of the persons with disabilities. Indeed, the human rights model protects human rights, but based on the human rights that they protect, we need to look at the changes in these different human rights. We often say that the Declaration of Human Rights or the human rights model continue to serve as barriers for persons with disabilities in the society. So, as a person with disabilities, you need to look closely at CRPD and see if that actually considered a comprehensive aspects of human rights. For ICF and the interactive impact of each other. A health organization such as WTO, the reason they do not include human rights inside the WTO is because the purpose is different. But of course, I would still think that it's odd that human rights is not considered in WHO. And my article also conduct relevant research. Thank you for the response. For the third question, regarding community college, we'll first ask Presenter Zheng. I think it's not understood deeply, but at the same time, it is very important. Actually, the only venue you can observe in lifelong learning on how persons with disabilities is doing in inclusive education. The reason I do this, of course, is based on my own experiences and also my partners. Interestingly, people joining community college are normally in their middle age or senior years, but the teams, the faculties are normally very young, but they found that the assistance they need would not be able to get. So when more and more persons with disabilities join the community colleges, they found that they do not have the resources to support these students, be it hardware or in software. So normally, think about the facilities. All those facilities are for young people. But for wheelchair, for accessibility equipments, not to mention accessibility, they cannot even use them. And also, elevator is an issue. because normally then would set a time, you can only use it at 6:30 to 6:45 because, well, the school have to pay for the electricity bill. It's a very practical issue. They have to also pay rents to this elementary school and high school. And also, you can only take the elevator at 9:30 to 9:45. Think about it. You will not be able to attract persons with disability to attend school with that strict condition. Only Beito's Community College has its own building and its own elevator where they allow access every time. So that's a very hard physical limitation. Secondly, regarding the attitude, not everyone has the expertise regarding persons with disabilities to face, know, and understand how to conduct inclusive education. For instance, for a class management, if the lecturers spend more time on persons with disabilities, the other students will feel that their right to education is infringed. That's a similar issue faced with normal formal educations. Without assistance, without relevant expertise, how do you promote inclusive education? The reason I conduct this research is because community colleges needs assistance, but they don't see community college as a formal system. Secondly, in addition to gender, if we look at the statistics, new residents and also low and middle income different identities, you will find that the female are much higher than male. For formal education institutions, especially for those relatively vulnerable females, they need to go through community college to find the human dignity and the social connections they lost in the past. There's also this urban and rural gap. The Taipei and New Taipei City with the MRT network accounts for 50% of all peoples in community colleges. This means that rural community colleges, in theory, the partners also found that these community colleges as a way to convene or gather these communities. And they have higher needs, but it's harder for them to access to those services because they don't have very convenient transportation. All those restrictions and limitations are something that our young partners identify. And since we are entering into an aging society, that number would only increase. And we only see this social prescription. What do I mean by that? All those people are the ones with certificates. So we identify those persons with disabilities. But with the development, there are people without these certificates, but they do have these special needs, especially persons with mental disabilities. They cannot find a sense of achievement, but they found a sense of belonging within the school. So the accessibility in terms of transportation and also the resources that can be provided to the team and these physical restrictions prevent them from going into these services. They have needs, but they don't have much support. Because within CRPD, the majority of the focus is still on formal education system. And that's why I want people to understand and know that we have so many needs. How do we maybe domesticate our laws so that through evaluation, from the official standpoint of evaluation, we can get more support from the government agencies. Thank you very much for the sharings, but we've exceeded 10 minutes to our current session. Once again, thank you very much for our four presenters and our discussant, Professor Sun. This wraps up our issue number 4 and our discussion. Thank you everyone for your participation. Thank you to all discussants and presenters and moderators. Next is our discussion and closing. We'd like to invite our 2 moderators, Secretary General of the League for Persons with Disabilities, Hong Xinping, and President Zhou Yijun of Taiwan Association of Disability Studies.
各位亲爱的与会者，那现在已经进行到了我们今年呢论坛的最后一个部分。那我想呢，也许大家还有一些问题，在之前的场次还没有因为时间的限制没能够这个提出来，后有些问题或是有些回馈。那如果大家还有一些问题或回馈，那我们还有一点点的时间，那我们现在是不是就开放让大家做一些提问？
还有线上的朋友们，嘿，也欢迎这个时候可以线上提问。
这边有一位。
好，是后面有一位。
这边有一位。
哦，好，那我们就先请这边，然后再请这位，应该是点针，好，认出来，是，好，
谢谢主席哦。我叫李纯一哦，是新生活协会的理事哦。那这2天学习很多，收获很多。我有几点我的心得分享哈。第一点就是我支持昨天那个陈柏燕同学的合理调整的法制化哈，因为目前合理调整并没有法制化。最简单的方法就是各县市政府依据自治法规先制定自治条例，我觉得这是非常好的建议。那第2点就是我们还没有立障碍歧视法这个法律。那澳洲昨天的报告，还有韩国都有歧视法的法律的规定。哦，这个歧视法的立法，我觉得是有必要。再来就是有关那个不同工作同等报酬的这个观念非常好。可是障碍者因为身体的因素，需要政府来支持。换句话说，像精障者，他的劳动成本比一般人高1/3，所以1/3这一部分就必须由政府来补贴他的薪资。那最后一点就是关于那个残障者禁用的比例哦，韩国是2.5%，我们政府采购法是3%。那我建议是提高到5%以上，谢谢。
好，非常谢谢李先生您的分享。那我们接下来是不是也请后面的这位参与者？
好，大家好。那我这2天听了就是很多老师们的分享，其实会觉得说，确实 CRPD 就是环环相扣的，就是各条文之间是很有关系的。比方说，像昨天讨论到2件事情，一个是去机构化跟支持性决策。一般来说，大家可能会觉得去机构化跟就是19条自立生活与融入社区是有关的，但是人不太可能自外于社会而生存，障碍者也应该要和大家一样，可以为自己的生活做出选择、决定和承担责任。所以我会觉得说，如果结合这2个主题，假设我们用落实支持性决策为前提，去思考如何实现去机构化，是不是一个比较有可能会就是有机会达成的方向？如果我们认为说每个人都应该有自己选择自己想要怎么过生活的权利，但现在确实就是有机构还存在，那政府也在讨论相关的议题，还有发展相关的政策，包含说既有的机构还要不要继续存在，机构可能可以如何转型，或是说相关的服务要怎么样去发展。那最重要的其实还是障碍者本身，就是特别是一般认为认知上面可能比较需要协助的心智障碍者跟精神障碍者，要怎么样去依照他的意愿，在得到他所需要的支持之下，决定他怎么样去过他的生活。那他的生活里面当然也包含到就是跟他们自己有关的这些相关的利害关系人，怎么样落实对他的尊重，应该是很重要的事情。我觉得最重要的事情是希望可以不要再用保护之名行限制之实。对，谢谢。
参与者的分享。那
不知道有没有日本跟韩国的与会者能够分享一下？
No. Okay. All right. Thank you very much. All right, then it seems that both our participants are more like giving us feedback regarding what they think about the forum. I do feel that the feelings of persons with disabilities and the reflections of persons with disabilities are very important. We also have government representatives from different levels and different agencies. I think this also serves as a very good opportunities to allow us to understand the feelings and also the feedback of one another. Xinping, I feel that we've served our task. We're almost come to the end. Yeah, before we end, I would just like to introduce these information package that you have. In addition to the brochure, we also have the introduction of NHRC in Taiwan. And I don't know if you noticed this, we have a stamp here. This is actually a stamp provided by the post office. It's a real stamp, so you can really use it. And it includes the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, CRC, and CEDAW, and of course, the most important of all, CRPD. So I share all this with you. This is sort of like a souvenir to you all, and also look forward to the day where we continue to realize and implement all different international human rights conventions. Once again, I would like to thank the delegation from Japan and South Korea. Thank you for coming from afar. Our biggest reward is that with these comparisons across a region, we will be able to know how we can better implement and improve the rights of persons with disabilities. Once again, I would like to thank the organizers, in addition to the League for Persons with Disabilities and Taiwan Society of Disability Studies. I would like to thank the Human Rights Program of Suzhou University and Idian Foundations, Dongwu Foundation, National Human Rights Commission, and others. If there's no further questions, then I will now officially announce this sums up the forum. Thank you everyone. Thank you for your participation. I will see you next year in Japan.